tech in Asia, not logistics in Asia. So it's the culture which sets it apart first. Then the next thing we think about when it comes to technology is how does a company leverage technology to really differentiate? The key in technology is not to be the best cost saver, because what you see in today's landscape is that money is everywhere. You might be cheaper than the other guy, but the other guy just power through because he can afford to lose more money. The key about technology is how do you do things other people cannot? How do you use technology to enable services competitors absolutely cannot? You cannot throw money at the problem. And I think that's the first step we use in terms of deciding, should we devote our tech resources to solving this problem or that problem? And then the next thing is, a lot of people ask about logistics, why don't you build robots, why don't you use autonomous things? Then the next thing about technology is use technology to enable scale, not to save costs in a specific vertical or specific silo. And it is quite obvious, so the way we use technology is we want technology to automate intuition. We want people to not have to think so much. That way you get consistency in quality, consistency in service, and the ability to scale. So we don't overinvest in things which sound sexy, fetish. People ask about point to point. That's a whole different business. It's not our business. So we try to avoid fads, automation, and all that. And we try to ask ourselves the difficult questions on what should really be done and what is sustainable in the long run.
And at its lowest point again, and the CEO is just bailing out, because that's technically what they could do. They just flounder out. So you don't want to be caught in that situation as well. You want to keep your founders. You want to make sure that they're as driven and motivated all the way. And that's something that Chang mentioned throughout this panel. This is something that he and his founding team members, they always want to make sure that they can keep doing even the dirtiest job, going through the ruralist areas of Indonesia and still be able to deliver just as anybody in the company can. So this is something
available both on the Apple App Store as well as the Google Play Store, and you can use the app to actually interact with fellow attendees. Secondly, we can also, we're looking for a little bit more interaction this year. We want to hear from you as well. And for that, we're using Slido.com. So if you actually whip out your smartphones right now and head on to Slido.com, all you have to do is enter the code, which is actually our hashtag as well, and that's TIASG 2018. You'll be able to select the main stage or any other sessions that you're participating in. And
let's talk about that. How should a young consumer electronics startup do hardware in 2018?
So there's a couple paths, and one of the things that I talk about to founders is deciding whether you're going to be on the venture capital path. That's kind of the first why that you have to go down. You have to decide, are you going to build a company that's going to be supported by venture capital, or are you going to build a company that's supported by revenue and net receipts from your customers? Because they're fundamentally quite different, and in some ways is more easy to build the non-VC version of the company, especially today. I've seen a number of, and here's why. As I mentioned before, I have this fundamental belief that people are going to buy gadgets. Like, people love buying cool stuff. I buy a ton of random things, Kickstarter projects, random new gadgets that my friends recommend. I'm a cyclist, so I spend a lot of money on like weird little bicycle computers and helmets and that kind of thing. And I think there's fundamentally a great set of companies that can be built off the backs of kind of early adopters that are willing to go out on a limb and spend money on these gadgets. I think the pitfall is when a founder starts down that path and builds a nice business that's generating cash and you're reinvesting in next year's products and that kind of thing. But then you get lured back to the other side. You get lured to someone, like maybe you're making $1 million per year in revenue, just breaking even, and someone says, oh, I'd love to invest. I'd love to put a couple $1 million into this company. And then you kind of veer off and you're stuck in this nether region where you're between the revenue-backed startup and the venture-backed startup, and you start spending more money. You start spending that cash that you just put in the bank without maintaining profitability or maintaining your kind of really frugal sense. And that really, I think, throws some startups into a loop. So I like right from the get-go, I really encourage founders to think about that, to think like, am I going to build a company? Am I comfortable with myself? The market that I'm selling into, are they comfortable with kind of the economics of a a revenue-backed startup? Or on the other side, am I targeting a multi-billion-dollar company at some point in the future? And if so, you have to think about the capital requirements, and you have to think about how will the business model work pretty far into the future, like looking at least three plus years out.
If you're talking the non-VC path, that would be starting up a niche
or the niche. And what's cool about niche products these days is that because the internet is so efficient at being able to share news and cool information and cool products, is that what sounds like a niche to you is actually a really gigantic pool of potential customers and potential users if you're using the internet to your advantage and marketing all the way around the world. So for example, with Pebble, when we sold our first product on Kickstarter, we ended up shipping to over 130 countries around the world, including a ton to Singapore. Singapore was like the third or fourth, I think after the US and Canada, Germany and Singapore. And so what we realized is that it's fairly easy to quickly build a global business. And if you're marketing against a niche, it's possible that while you might only have a couple friends who want to buy one, you can really spread it virally around the world and target and have the product find that small niche.
So yeah, speaking of growing a hardware company, I think that there's a great question here about eventually running into conflict, right, with the big boys like the Apples and Googles and Amazon.
It was me, my co-founding engineer, 2 interns working out of the living room in Palo Alto. It's very similar to that TV show Silicon Valley, which I can't watch anymore because it's too real. And we were just hacking and living together and living in this place. And at 7 o'clock in the morning, when we pressed the button, or after the kind of money started rolling in, we were all still, like, some of us were sleeping. I was in my pajamas, and things were changing already. We knew immediately that we had a mission. And I see there's a question about how do we think about copying our idea on Kickstarter. After it really clicked, after it took off, we knew that our one mission was to build and ship something that people wanted. Like, we had already described the product that people want. Now we had to fucking build it. We had to make 85,000 of them to ship to our Kickstarter backers. And we wrote that at the top of the whiteboard, and we said that this is the only mission that we have. Literally ignore everything in the world except for that. We need to go and do that. And that was the perfect filter function. So I immediately hired a bunch of my friends. I just phoned up all my friends from Waterloo, people who I would have loved to have hired before, but weren't interested in jumping in a startup at that stage. Plus, I couldn't pay them anything. I phoned them up and I said, "Look, things have changed. I really need you to get into a plane and fly out to California." All 9 of them did. So we went from a 2-person team to an 11-person team in 3 days. And we said, that's it. We're not hiring anyone else. Because I'd heard a piece of advice, which was you can either build a great company in a very short period of time, or you could build a great team, or you could build a great product, but you can't try to do all of those things at the same time. And so we made a very tough call, which was to pause hiring completely. And again, this was one of those naive things that I was talking about, that most people, when faced with the problem of how do you build 85,000 something, is you turn to people who've had an experience or have done it before, and you kind of feature and not really building up our capabilities on the health and fitness side until later in 2015. But I think that despite the mistakes that we made and some of the bad paths that we took, we really did have this brand that stood for something. And as people thought about which product they were going to get, they thought about Pebble and they said, well, it's the Kickstarter darling, the one that I heard about 3 or 4 years ago, but still kind of reflects some of those early ideals.
So let's talk about Kickstarter, right? I think so. You went around raising VC funding, couldn't get investment.
Right.
I tried, and then how did Kickstarter come into the picture?
Kickstarter was a last resort. So I went through YC in 2011, and the way YC works is there are several partners, usually people who've had successful companies. When I went through YC, there was Paul, Graham, and Jessica, And the way the YC works is you go through YC for the 3 months. That's kind of the early batch. And then you do a demo day. But then for the years after, you're still part of YC, and I would still have office hours, which are really just 20-minute walks around the block with the partners, and I would share the problems that we had and the issues that we were running into. And so after I tried to pitch 30 VCs and tried to raise some more money, probably should have done this before, but anyways, I did it after. I scheduled an office hour with Paul Graham, and I said, PG has this wonderful ability to see through all of your crap and ask you the one question that you didn't want to be asked. So I had planned to go into this meeting and say, okay, I want to share all this information for fundraising and maybe get some tips on how to position my pitch for investors. And PG was just like, stop. You're not going to be able to raise any money. And I felt terrible in that. He was like, is there anything else you could do? Have you considered selling software? Which is like the one thing that a hardware entrepreneur does not want to hear. Because like I started the company because I love hardware, I love having something on my wrist that I got to make. And I was like, no, PG, we're not getting like this. Even if we did sell like an operating system for smartwatches, there literally are no other smartwatches, so there was no one to buy the software. And he said, is there anything else? Is there anything else you could do? We had maybe $30,000 left in the bank account. We weren't spending that much, but we just didn't have that much left. And he said, literally anything else you can do. And I said, well, we are thinking about going on Kickstarter. And he said, cool, what's Kickstarter? And I explained, and I think he probably may have looked at his watch. He was like, that sounds like a great idea. You should go and do that. So we spent a month, and we spent the last little bit of money we had left building a prototype, built a couple prototypes of Pebble, borrowed a friend's camera, got a bunch of my friends and interns and anyone who was literally in town to star in this first video that I filmed. And we had fairly low expectations of this first Kickstarter. Like we had sold a couple thousand of these watches, and we said we had all these new plans for Pebble. The first one was not called Pebble. This was the first watch called Pebble.
Like that on someone that you work with? Are you having a positive influence on their life? And I still talk about my first boss whenever I get an opportunity. He was a great man that taught me a lot about debits and credits, but also allowed me to flourish as a young man. Traditional financial incentives. If you work in sales, you're going to have a commission policy. You're going to know exactly what it is, or you should do, and you'll be working towards that to earn commissions. We have that at Xero, and it works very well. We also have LTI, so stock options, share-based payments. We have all of the classic financial incentives. And for me, I've learned over the years that gets to a point where it starts to kind of peter out. It's not as strong anymore. And what we try to do in some instances is actually talk to people about a different type of financial incentive. So rather than giving a cash payment to somebody for overperformance,